There's a lot of things that I've said over the years which were perceived to be crazy. And then suddenly they start to move mainstream.
I'm waiting for someone to convince me that we don't live in a simulation.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
What if all you ever knew was a lie?
Coming up, the great David Icke, always riveting, always fascinating to listen to, and best of all, a heck of a nice guy. David Icke, next on the Signals podcast. David Icke, thank you for doing this, taking the time out. I understand that you are on a speaking tour, and I really appreciate you taking a few minutes with me on Signals.
No problem.
I've been following you for a long time. I've read The Trap, and this guy here, which is a challenge. I'm up to page 501. So I'm right with you, and I think I'm not sure where you want to start. I'd like to start with the unrest in Israel, because on page 501 on Friday, I was reading about your reference to Albert Pike and about what the Third World War would look like, and it's happening at this very moment. So I wonder if you might want to kick off with that.
Yeah, well, Albert Pike was a really high leading Freemason in the United States in the 1800s, and a Canadian naval officer by the name of Carr wrote a book in the 1950s in which he claimed to have evidence of a letter which Pike wrote in 1871 to another, what they call Illuminati, what I call the global cult operative, called Giuseppe Mazzini, in which he described 3 world wars. And those wars were designed to completely transform human society into a, shall we say, well, in Pike's words, a Lucifer worshipping, in my word, dystopia. And of course, Carr talked about the letter in the 1950s. And so you can forget the first 2 world wars. They were described accurately, yes, but it's the 1950s. So, you can make that up easy. So the credibility really comes down to the Third World War. And Pike said that would come out of a conflict between what he called political Zionism and the Islamic world. And, people might look at that and say, well, hold on a minute, 1871. He's talking about political Zionism and, the state of Israel. Well, a few things to that. First of all, Zionism was really gathering momentum in that late 1800s period. But also, it's important to get across that there are 2 timelines as there are two levels of knowledge in the world. One is within the secret societies of what I call this global cult, which is a network, a global network of secret societies. But they're fiercely compartmentalized. So the vast majority of people, even in the secret societies, do not know what the real agenda is, what the real goal is, and what the real masters are. And the other lack of knowledge, in this case, is the general population. And the idea is that you hoard and pass on through the generations knowledge within the secret society network, particularly, as I say, it's in levels. And that knowledge pertains to A, the agenda for the world, and B, the nature of reality, what this is, who we are, all of that. And if you look at the history, it was this same cult in its various forms, not least in America, through J.D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon, and the Rockefeller family, who were very much involved in the creation of the education system. They were involved in the creation of Big Pharma. The Rockefeller family were involved in the creation of the World Health Organization, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea is that the cult controls the sources of information from which the population get its perceptions and its understanding of self, the world, and world events. So you've got the cult, which is passing on this very advanced knowledge, and you've got the population, which is being, and never more so than now with all the censorship. Silicon Valley was a cult creation in terms of its major players and major organizations. You've got the straitjacket on information stroke knowledge that's being imposed by the cult on the population. Because secret society is a secret for a reason, to keep secrets from the population. So what Pike was saying would have been known within the cult networks, in the same way that when Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World in 1932 and talked about the end of procreation as we know it, and the fact the species would be produced technologically in world state hatcheries, as he put it. People think, well, how would he know that? Well, if you can get access to this cult in a core, then they have a completely different timeline and a completely different projection than the population has. The population just know, oh, it's on the news today. But this cult projects a long time forward, and therefore people can say things and predict things and describe things that at the time are impossible. It's like George Orwell, Eric Blair, as he was with his real name, talked about telescreens and technology that didn't exist then, just as Huxley did. But it was coming, and it has come. And what Pike was describing was a war, a conflict between what he called political Zionism and the Islamic world that would pan out into a much greater global world conflict to produce his Third World War. And where it goes from here, we'll have to see. But certainly current events, if they expand and become more and more and more extreme and expansive, then it will mirror what he said would be the trigger of the Third World War.
Yeah, I'm really concerned that all this distraction and chaos in the world, particularly with the two wars, the one in Ukraine, the one in Israel, may serve as, like I said, a distraction to keep us looking the other way, because I'm concerned about this new this World Health Organization treaty, which they're trying to put through, which could suspend our constitutions and our human rights, freedoms. It could harm our economies. So I'm concerned that they're going to try and get this thing through. Dr. John Campbell had a guest on this morning talking about his concerns about this treaty and how it will affect the world so negatively.
Yeah, the treaty is a classic of its kind. If you look at this cult and its development, you can go back into the ancient world and start to pick it up. But the story from there to now has been one of constant expansion and influence until, in the end, now it's global. So you can follow it through the Roman Empire and up into Northern Europe, and then you can follow it with the colonial empires of Europe, not least the British. And that's when the cult went global. And when we had this sleight of hand, which it was, to apparently give freedom back to the former colonies, they left out there the secret society network and the bloodline families that are very prominent in it. And they've gone on controlling those countries ever since, while people, because they have a vote every 4 or 5 years, think they're somehow free and in charge of their own destiny and choosing their own government. And so the constant centralization of power, which the expansion of this cult into the wider world has achieved, is a very simple dynamic. The more you centralize power, the more power the few have over more and more and more. And the more you centralize power, the more power you have at the center to centralize even quicker. So the speed of centralization gets faster and faster. And we've reached the point now where even in the world of the scene, and the real power is behind in the shadows, but even in the world of the scene, a relative handful of billionaires are actually, they have accumulated control over vast amounts of the world's wealth and resources. And what we're seeing with the World Health Organization is the next stage of that. We can look back to 1948 and see how the Rockefellers were centrally involved in creating the World Health Organization. But all these things, they have an ulterior motive. For instance, in Britain, we have something called Ofcom, the Office of Communications, which is or was only the broadcast regulator of the UK government. It's claimed to be independent, but they appoint the government appoints the people involved. And it was created by Tony Blair when he was prime minister. So obviously it has to be really bad, with a really bad alternative motive to the one that they're telling you. And over a period of time, it's grasped more and more power. I mean, it basically told the broadcast media in Britain at the time of the COVID hoax was played in April of 2020 that they would not have me on. They would not have me on, and they never have. I've never been in the British broadcast media since. And now we've had this online safety bill that's been passed, and it's now given this Ofcom not only control over broadcast media, which it had, but over the internet. And so they create organizations and then they progress them to what they are always planned all along to become. And it's the same with the World Health Organization. You say, oh no, it's just a central organization to coordinate health and all that. Yeah, coordinate. Yeah, coordinate. Yeah, all right. And then we had the COVID card, and suddenly what the World Health Organization said, most overwhelmingly, the rest of the world did. Of course, one of the biggest funders, certainly the biggest private funder by zilch massive amounts rather, is Bill Gates, and Bill Gates is a Rockefeller gopher. So you can see that dynamic as well. And what this treaty is to enforce and encode into law what happened during COVID, so that when the World Health Organization announces there's a pandemic, On what criteria? Well, whatever we decide. Then all these member countries will have to impose the restrictions and the responses that the World Health Organization says they must do. And what is that? That's exactly what the World Health Organization was created to do, and incrementally has got closer and closer to it. And that's to have absolute control over world health policy, from which so much dystopia can come, under one roof. And it's fronted up by this guy, Tedros, this Ethiopian crook. And he officially will be dictating to the rest of the world. He'll be doing what his masters tell him, like Gates and the Rockefellers, but officially that's what he'll be doing. And, you know, it's a real red flag, flashing red lights, that all these politicians, political leaders around the world are moving towards that treaty, when it's, first of all, handing all their national sovereignty over health to the World Health Organization. And B, it's so blatantly obvious what the game is. And just as this cult has expanded into the global entity it became, so it's expanded into more and more of human society, national government, government agencies, the banking system, the corporations, Silicon Valley, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization. And its control is now absolutely vast because it's been done under the radar. We're now seeing it, people can now see it, but it's been under the radar overwhelmingly. And so you have, for instance, when the COVID card was played, you had the World Health Organization giving us the narrative, the lies, the script, and then you had Silicon Valley saying we're going to censor anyone that challenges that script and the validity of that narrative, which is just extraordinary if you don't know what's going on. I mean, it's supposed to be the town square where, you know, information, evidence, opinion is exchanged. But no, immediately right at the start. But once you realize that the Silicon Valley corporations, your Facebooks, your Googles, Google owned YouTube, of course, etc., are cult operations, and the World Health Organization is a cult operation, what you've got is one arm of the cult protecting the narrative being put out by another arm of the cult. And it's the same with Big Pharma and the regulatory agencies of Big Pharma. So you have Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, all these people going to the regulatory agencies in America, like the CDC and the FDA and the MHRA in Britain. And they say, we want permission to roll out this fake vaccines, not even a vaccine by previous criteria, to everybody and younger age groups until we get down to the babies. And the regulatory agencies don't say, well, you haven't done any trials worth the name. What are you talking about? No chance. We're here to protect the people from you. No. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And what you've got is big pharma corporations owned by the cult going to regulatory agencies owned by the cult to ask for permission to advance the cult agenda of playing out the fake vaccine. This is how it works. And so if you look at current events in Israel, you can see the same process. You don't have to do much research into Hamas to realize that fundamental to the creation and funding of Hamas has been the Israeli government. And so you're looking again at Hamas that says we're the leaders of the Palestinian people in Gaza, etc. Okay. And there's the Israeli government and military and intelligence operation like Mossad and Shin Bet, the domestic one. And they say, oh yeah, we're leading the Jewish people. But actually, if you go one step back into the shadows, into the cult, then actually the same hands are controlling both. And this starts to explain a few things which otherwise would not be explainable. As soon as I heard the stories of what was happening with the Hamas attacks, I mean, just unbelievable in Israel, is look, I've researched this intensely. I've got books up there that are that thick on these subjects. Israel has one of the best trained, most technologically sophisticated armies, the Israeli Defense Forces, and intelligence and surveillance networks, Mossad, Shin Bet, and so on, in the world. It's phenomenal. Yeah. And the moment I saw it, I thought, the Hamas terrorists, they breached something like 15 locations in the fence, the Gaza fence, and there was no response. Now that is absolutely impossible. Yes. And what's happened since I heard another or saw another interview today on this subject, what's happened is former border guards in the Israeli Defense Forces who worked on surveillance of the fence and Gaza in general, they've said it's impossible. You know, if a cockroach touched the fence, we'd know about it. If a bird did, we'd know about it. And yet these tractors came along, knocked the bloody fence down, they all poured through, and no, there was no response. It's ridiculous. Now I'm starting to hear from similar sources that troops were moved out, soldiers were moved out to another location on some other pretext that would normally be there. And when Israel calls this horror their 9/11, there's so many parallels to 9/11. And one of them, and I wrote a book called The Trigger, and again, very, very thick, looking at what really happened in 9/11, on 9/11. And the thing that hits you is right across the board, the normal protection and response systems were all stood down on 9/11. And that reminded me of a guy, an American, who I've quoted in some of my earlier books, a guy called Leroy Fletcher Prouty. I'm sure you've heard of him. And he was a military guy in the time of the Kennedy assassination. And he said once that you don't have to basically orchestrate assassinations or like what happened in Israel. You have to let it happen. Because you see, once the Gaza fence was breached, those Hamas people are going to come through and they're going to do what they do. So it's not, you don't have to orchestrate that. It will happen. What you do is you allow it to happen. And as he said, Fletcher Prouty, the biggest clue is who had the power to call off the normal defense protection systems and allowed it to happen. And in this case, it was the Netanyahu government. It was the people running the Israeli Defense Forces. It was people running Mossad and Shin Bet, the domestic intelligence operation. And, from what I gather in Israel, talking to some people, I talked to one person today in Israel, who's kind of an activist and trying to get this information out. It's anyone in Israel that is asking these questions, how was it allowed to happen, is being demonized, targeted, and censored, because it's so blatant, this. I mean, it's even more blatant than 9/11, because a lot of the things were kind of stood down on 9/11, yes, but you have to start researching it to start to uncover that, most of it anyway. But with this, it's in your face. One of the most sophisticated armies and intelligence operations in the world just stood by while it happened. On the other side, you've got the Hamas um, network that is taking advantage of it's allowed to happen, and the two are coordinated. Let's not be naive about this.
I heard there was a 7-hour stand down, another parallel to 9/11, where
Yeah,
responses
9/11
were.
was unbelievable, mate. I mean, what I did is the moment 9/11 happened, I knew it was a scam. I mean, I knew it immediately. What the official story wasn't true. And so I started researching it literally from the day it happened. And I produced a book actually in September 2002, 1 year to the time of the attacks, called Alice in Wonderland of the World Trade Center disaster: Why the official story of 9/11 is a monumental lie. And then a lot of years later, it was about, what would it be? I don't know, 2015, 16, something like that, 17 maybe. I thought, I'm going to update it. And I started to update or do the research to update that book. And I realized 2 weeks, that's all it took. I can't update this. There's so much more evidence and information now. I've got to start from scratch, which I did. And it was shocking when you look at any area of 9/11, the official story is simply a lie, an absolute monumental lie. And the biggest thing, again, as I say, was everything that was the normal response system was stood down. Exactly what's happened here. And so the question is why? And all right, yes, it's going to and is leading to the staggering bombing of Gaza. But if we go back to the Pike letter, where else is it going to go from there? And if you look at the Hamas leadership, you can call it that, they are trying to wind up Muslims all across the world to rise up against the West, which is basically what Pike was talking about. And we'll have to see where it goes from here. But the signs are ominous, to say the least. And another point, of course, is, people would ask the question, why would the Israeli government just allow that to happen to their own people? Because they couldn't care less about their own people. They're not serving Israelis. The Netanyahu government and the other governments, when he's not been in power, which has been most of the time, funnily enough, they don't care about Jewish people. If you look at what happened during COVID, and I've got friends in Israel, and we were communicating in that period, the fascistic, ironically, impositions of restrictions on Jewish people in Israel, as the Israeli government was working directly with Pfizer and the enforcement of the jab upon the Israeli population was extraordinary. You had Jewish lawyers who didn't know the big picture, but what they were saying at the time of COVID is, this is like Nazi Germany. Why is the Israeli leadership acting like Nazi Germany on these people? Because they couldn't care less. They're imposing an agenda. Then you've got Hamas. What did Hamas do during COVID? It ran out the jab for people in Gaza, etc. And does anyone think for a millisecond? Because all of us knew that when they did and orchestrated what they did in Israel, that the response from the Israeli government and military was not going to be exactly what it is now, which is the unbelievable devastation in Gaza, all the kids and all the women and civilians. Of course, you only got to look at not even long history, but recent history. Every time Hamas has been in any way attacking Israel, that's what the response has been. So when the attacks of this scale and this brutality were played out, absolutely, you knew there was going to be a phenomenal response. So what are the people who are supposed to be the protectors of the people of Gaza, what are they doing taking action that they knew would have the responses happening now? And one of the things, Ted, over the years that I've watched, whenever you've had like peace talks getting somewhere, rare, but when you have, and it looks like there's a coming together and maybe you can sort this out long term, rockets start being fired out of Gaza into Israel by Hamas. And then the Israeli government say, oh no, we can't carry on with these talks. Oh no, we're being attacked by Hamas, And so the thing has fallen down. And I've noticed this, and I've thought a few times, if these talks keep going on, mass rockets are going to start, and they do, because they're working in unison. They're answering to the same people, and this is why if the civilian population, not just in Gaza and Israel, but around the world, has got to realize that we're looking at the same hand, working through multiple masks, if you like, on the same face. And it's all to do with dividing, ruling us, bringing us into conflict, so we don't actually grasp what's really going on, that there is a global phenomenon, a global authority that is dictating world events. And they work through A and they work through B. And people think, oh, the Israeli government's representing us, or Hamas is representing us. No. Representing the cold. And we're seeing it again blatantly now.
You can't talk about peace. You've been banned in the Netherlands in an attempt to talk about peace. And I read in the trap, getting to your talks and lectures, that you were over here in Boston and you ended up in the 90s over in Cambridge, which I find extraordinary. I wonder if you might want to talk about the reception you had then versus what the reception is like now with these pop-up talks you're doing around England.
Well, I'll tell you, for a long time after I started going on this journey in 1990, it was very difficult to get anyone interested. It was literally not all, well, it was symbolic, but only just that you were banging your head against a wall that wasn't going to come down. And then 9/11 happened, and that started a big change in people in terms of numbers. And then what's happened on from this, and COVID especially, while enormous numbers of people bought it, a hell of a lot of people didn't, and it started to rearrange how they looked at the world. And so I'm now going around Britain, which is the only place I can go around, it seems, at the moment. I'm banned from 27 now European countries, and it'll be 29 by the end of the year, apparently. Banned from Australia. They're all sellout events, and I'm going deep in the rabbit hole. I mean, I'm not just going around poking around Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates. I'm going really deep in the rabbit hole, and people want that. In so many ways, the alternative media, what I call the mainstream alternative media, which in so many ways operates like the mainstream media does. It just sees the world in a slightly different way. The people who are awakening more and more, they're further down the rabbit hole than the mainstream alternative media. And so the reception has been fantastic. I mean, I've gone from being laughed at as I walk down the street to being stopped endlessly to discuss what's going on. And, I think what has happened in the last few weeks, and especially since the Hamas attacks and the response from Israel, is that a lot of people in what is called the alternative media, who aren't really alternative, they might have their little niche. They might have a psychological niche. They might have a men should stand up for themselves niche or whatever. But they've not got the big picture by not even close. I think a lot of those people who talk about freedom and talk about not censoring people, I think they've really put themselves on public display over this. You know, when you've got Jordan Peterson coming out and saying to Netanyahu on Twitter, give them hell. When you've got Andrew Tate coming out and cheering for Allah. And you've got Ben Shapiro, who, I mean, goodness knows what he's on in terms of what he's been saying. And this is the thing, you know if someone's got it or not by whether they take sides or not in things like this and situations like this. Because those who've got it know that actually there may seem to be two sides, but there's one master. And those who've not got it pick a side. And so many people in the alternative media have picked a side since this went on. And it's like, and what I'm seeing, I don't go on Twitter much, but I have gone on it quite a lot in the last week or so, because I wanted to see the responses of people. And it's a lot of people, and it's another confirmation that people who are starting to awaken are actually further down the rabbit hole than the mainstream alternative and the so-called big names in it. That they are seeing that picking a side is just confirmation that you don't know what you're talking about. It's not about sides. It's about one side working through multiple sides. And if you don't get that, you don't get anything. And it's interesting, too, that you look at Jordan Peterson and you at the Daily Wire and you look at Ben Shapiro. They both had the jab. I watched a video with Ben Shapiro where he's saying, look, I was lied to. I was lied to. They told me it was this and that, and it turns out not to be. And you're thinking, well, you're supposed to be the alternative media, mate. You're supposed to be researching this. And if you had, you wouldn't have had the jab. So, well, but you did. And, what I'm seeing, Ted, and fully enough, I write about this in my new book, The Dream, which came out about early September, which is obviously before, all this stuff has been happening and I'm talking about. And I have a section in it where I'm talking about the fact that I feel that the alternative media is being hijacked. See, there is a genuine alternative media, and that is one that says, look, I'll go wherever the evidence takes me. I have no preconceived idea of no belief system which is going to edit where I go. I'm going to go on the basis of the evidence and on where that takes me. That's the genuine alternative media. An alternative media that says, I don't want to censor anybody. If people have an opinion that is outrageous, well, people will perceive it to be outrageous. But once you start saying, I can have my opinion, but you can't have yours, however much I may disagree with it, you can't have yours because it's not what I believe, then you've not got freedom of speech anymore, because freedom of speech is the freedom to speak. And if you start to censor what people can say, then suddenly freedom of speech is gone, because you no longer have freedom of speech. You have freedom to speak within the parameters that authority decides that you can speak. And there are laws in place now, well, have been for a long time, that if you kind of shout fire in a theater and people scramble and get injured, well, there's laws against that. But once you start pre-censoring people, you can't say that. you're giving power to an authority to decide what can be said or not. That's what you're doing. And what I've seen in this period with Israel and Gaza are so-called, a lot of so-called names in the alternative media coming out and saying this shouldn't be allowed and that shouldn't be allowed. And you're going, hold on a minute. I thought you were calling for freedom of speech. And what I'm seeing is, I call it the barricade. It's like there's a barricade being built around the mainstream alternative media, which only looks in and only perceives the world through the five senses. So it may see the world slightly different from the mainstream media and mainstream society, but it's still perceiving the world of the seen and everything through the five senses. And that's fine. I do that every day on the website. I look at the here and now happenings. But if we only do that, we're going to be so focused, or put another way, we're going to be poking around in the symptoms and not seeing where the cause is coming from, because we won't go there. And what I'm finding on this speaking tour is that the people that come, they want to go there. They want this next stage. Okay, we know about Klaus Schwab, we know about Bill Gates and all that stuff. But what's that part of? What's the bigger picture of that? And the mainstream alternative media is still, focused on that one area, and I think that's dangerous. And you've also got people who've come into the alternative arena, and welcome everybody who's genuine, who let's say they have a history of not being interested in any of this stuff. They have a history of not wanting to go there, and then suddenly they are the one being held up as the person people must look up to, because he's telling them what's going on in the world. But actually, if you analyze it, all they're doing is telling you what some of us have long known and long talked about, and they're telling you only this small area. See, if you have someone, a celebrity, coming on a podcast and saying, or going on a mainstream television show. How do they get on a mainstream television show? I never could. And they say, you look at Pfizer, look at all the millionaires that all the money that the Pfizer people have made. It may sound okay, yeah, oh yeah, that's right, yeah. Well, he's telling them, yeah, that's why they banned him, yeah. But well, actually, not banned him, but what you're looking at is a peripheral level. The money is a bonus to this cult. Controlling money means you control choice, which means you control freedom, but it's a bonus. The real thing is about control. And the reason that this jab was so widely rolled out and imposed in every way that they could is because of A, what it's going to do to the human body, and B, because it's about a control system. There's so much more to know about this jab and how it's interacting with this cloud of 5G, 6G, 7G to come. So the money is just almost a peripheral level of it. And yet that's what I mean by the barricade. Oh, yeah, let's talk about, they're doing it for the money. They're doing it for a global dystopia in which the human brain will be connected to artificial intelligence and connected through that to the cloud, and the cloud will become the collective hive human mind. That's why they're doing it. And that is what we need to know about, not about whether they're making money. Of course they're making money.
Yeah, there's evidence that there's this graphene oxide in these shots, which serve as a superconductor, which could, I think you've mentioned before, make the body an antenna to receive information or feelings. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, well, it's funny you asked me that question when I've been talking about we need to break the barricade and go deeper and deeper and deeper in this. I mean, in my book, The Dream, goes massively deep in the rabbit hole, and there's still a long way still to go after that. And it's interesting, as I've researched things over the last, I'm in my 34th year now of doing it. You have to research a vast spectrum of subjects, to some of which don't seem to be part of a conspiracy, absolutely fundamental to it, actually, to actually connect the dots and see what the real tapestry looks like. And what I'm saying about the alternative mainstream media is it just focuses so much. Just look at the Daily Wire as a classic. On the political level, I mean, I've said about the Daily Wire, it's not an alternative media. I mean, I've got a lot of respect for Candace Owens, by the way, but it's not the alternative media. It's an alternative Republican party. And so that there's this focus on just the way it plays out politically, financially, and all that stuff, when actually the panorama is vast. So this is what I mean. Let me give you an example. One of the areas that I have researched at great length over the years is the electrical nature of what we call the universe. The universe is overwhelmingly 99% something called plasma. And plasma is an almost perfect vehicle for electricity to pass through. And this communication system of electricity and the plasma, it moves through what they call filaments. It's like a big, vast electrical system. Now, what's interesting is what these filaments do is that they create what we call DNA. If you look at human DNA with the spiral, the twisted spiral, that's how these filaments pass through the plasma to form the reality that we experience. Because the body is electrical. The brain processes information electrically. It communicates with the body electrically. The body communicates with the brain electrically. And then you go out into the greater universe, if you like, greater reality. And it's all electrical in nature. And so what a coincidence that we have this twisted spiral of energy communication we call DNA, and it also operates in the wider reality as we experience it. And that's because, as I said in the trap and now the dream, more deeply as you move along in your knowledge, we're in a simulation. It's a simulated reality that we are part of. And we are connecting with that simulation in a very, very similar way to the way a computer connects with Wi-Fi. You know, what happens with a computer and Wi-Fi is you've got the Wi-Fi field, which is a radiation field encoded with information called the internet. And then the computer, depending on how you program it, picks up a section of that Wi-Fi field and decodes it into a completely different state on the computer screen. Because the only place the internet exists in that form is on the screen. Actually, not just on the screen, all the decoding to put that on the screen is going on inside the computer. And then you start to look at the way that we create, decode, process reality. And it's exactly the same. The five senses are, and the DNA, it's a receiver transmission system. Same with the universe. It's all receiver transmission. It's information encoded, encoded information and other information to decode that information, which is what a computer does. A computer is encoded to decode Wi-Fi. And we are encoded to decode this reality, because at the point where we attach to it through the five senses, what we're picking up is frequencies, wave fields of information. I mean, you know, the ears with sound waves is classic, but all the senses work like that. And they then transform that waveform information into electrical information, which is communicated to the brain, and different parts of the brain specialize in decoding the different senses, and then they form a reality from that information. So we're going along believing that we're living in an external reality when actually it's in here, just as the internet, as we perceive it, is inside the computer. And what I'm seeing, Ted, so blatantly, obviously, is this explosion of technology and AI that is taking the world over is actually a technological mimicking of our actual reality. And so if you look at computer games, like virtual reality computer games, how are we interacting with them? Through the five senses. What they do is you put the headset on, or you put the audio on, or you put the gloves on, the more sophisticated ones, and the information that they're receiving is overriding the information that we would normally receive to decode this reality, and we decode a different reality. So you only got to go on the internet and look at these compilations of people and their reactions when they've put a headset on and the game starts to play, the virtual reality game starts to play, and look at them. They're screaming, they're jumping around, they're falling over because of the information that they're receiving, which has overridden their sense of reality. And so if they can do that, do just a headset on, and it completely takes over your reality, then what if this human body was the equivalent of a headset? What if the human body, which I've been calling a biological computer since the 1990s, is actually decoding the simulation? And the simulation is not a construct, it's a source of information. And so we are just like Wi-Fi. And so we are decoding from that information source a sense of reality that we perceive as the world, which is actually nothing like in its base form what we're experiencing. What I first started talking about this, that this is a simulation, just after the turn of the millennium. And now more and more and more, years and years and years later, a lot of years later, more and more mainstream scientists are saying, well, it does look like this is a simulated reality. Because if you go down the symbol, the matrix simulation hypothesis, many, many, many things, eventually all of them, but many things that the normal official version of reality can't explain become explainable. In fact, this week, a few days ago now, just across from where I'm sitting, just across the channel from the island where I live, in Portsmouth on the south coast of England, there's a university physicist, professor, who's got a lot of coverage in the British media, because he's just come out and said, I think we live in a simulation and it's based on information. Exactly. It's what I've been saying all along. It's information. And then you go into the next question, which is, so as a guy called Rich Terrell, as a computer scientist and what have you at NASA said in 2017, he said he'd concluded that this reality is a simulated, a holographic simulation, exactly right. And if it's a holographic simulation, then some intelligence of some form has to have created it, which is really quite unchallengeable. It's not going to be natural, is it? And so we've gone a long way down the rabbit hole in the last few minutes from Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum. Important as they are at the level they operate, there's so much more to know. And this barricade around the mainstream alternative media is acting as a barrier for many people, that they're so focused on the names, dates, places, here and now. What's Klaus Schwab doing? What's Trump doing? What's Biden doing? That they're not going where the real big picture will take them.
I first discovered you watching a lecture you gave at Wembley some years ago, and I thought that was terrific. You were talking about Saturn and the repeated symbolism of Saturn throughout history in different parts of the world. And I think I read in Everything You Need to Know that Saturn actually serves as some kind of a transmitter.
Yeah, I think that's what the rings are, and it's interesting. I mentioned a few minutes ago about the electric universe area of scientific research, and there's actually a conduit between that and Saturn, which is an American called David Tolbert. David Tolbert is one of the leading lights in the electric universe arena of research, something called the Thunderbolts Project. But he's also researched to great length and in great detail the background to Saturn. And I've got his book up there, which I read a long time ago. You can't get a copy now. It's not in print. It costs a fortune if you want to buy one. And it's about Saturn myths. And what he did is he went around the world looking at all the different ancient cultures and what they said about Saturn. And also asking the question, why was Saturn the major god of the Roman Empire? And what he found was the symbolism that you find all over the world, the symbolism that you find on rocks and in caves, paintings and stuff, overwhelmingly relates to Saturn. But then there comes another question, which is, if Saturn was where it was then, as it is now, how would all these ancient societies be focusing on Saturn? You can hardly bloody see it. Certainly not without a telescope, see the rings. And he started looking at these myths and putting the story together, which is that there was a time when Saturn was the major, quote, sun of the Earth. And there was a twin sun system, the one we have now, and there was Saturn. But Saturn was the focal point. And it's you can go on the internet on YouTube and look for David Tolbert's work on Saturn. And you'll see a very good animation of what he says happened. And so the focus, the global focus on Saturn, was because Saturn was the global focus. It was the major body in relation to the Earth. And then came gigantic cataclysms in the solar system. First of all, they were talked about by this guy, Emanuel Velikovsky. He was laughed at in the 50s and dismissed by the scientific establishment, which is pretty much confirmation that you're over the target if the scientific establishment turn against you. But as we've moved on, and there's been more and more evidence and information, not least with the two probes that went to Saturn, that took fantastic pictures of Saturn. There was the Cassini one, and then there was another one before that, and actually another two, I think, Voyager. And what Velikovsky was talking about, the kind of things that David Tolbert is talking about, have got more and more validity and more confirmation that the result of this cataclysm was that Saturn ended up where it is now rather than where it was before. And what's fascinating about Saturn and these myths is that no one in these myths mentions rings. Nobody. So we've got a Saturn, which was a kind of a sun, and no one mentions rings. And now it's got rings.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard or read about some observations that the rings are actually being produced real time, and you can, and they've been able to see the rings being produced by these giant objects.
Yeah, there was a guy who wrote a book. He was a scientist who wrote a book called Rings of Saturn, because when the Voyager pictures were coming back, the first the probe to Saturn, if you like, he was looking through the pictures and he was realizing that the rings were changing, not over hundreds of thousands of years. They were changing in a very, very short time. And then the Cassini probe followed that years later and was around Saturn for a very long time. And he realized again that the rings were changing. And what he was seeing were these like electromagnetic vehicles, he called them. They were kind of cigar shaped, and they were vast, absolutely vast, in the rings of Saturn. And there was a form of exhaust, as he called it, going out from them that was actually forming the rings. And if you look at Saturn in some detail, you find that at its northern pole, there's an hexagonal storm that's raging permanently, which creates a hexagon. A hexagon. How does a storm do that? But it does. You can see it very clearly. And at the bottom of Saturn, the southern pole, is another storm that looks very much like an eye, which is permanent in the sense that since they first saw it, it's still there. And it seems to me that I go into this in some of the books in great detail, is that Saturn is giving off a frequency, a sound system. The rings are part of that. And the sound system is forming these storms. And it's impacting upon reality in what we call the solar system, this reality, and affecting the way that people see the world and see themselves and see each other. It's like a frequency that's communicating information that is impacting upon the perceptions of the population. Now, if you then go to the next level of that, that's what this cloud is all about. You know, Ray Kurzweil, the Google executive, said some years ago, and it's all turning out to be the case, that by 2030, humans would be being connected to the cloud, this electromagnetic field, technologically generated, 5G, 6G, 7G to come, and that we would be connected to artificial intelligence. And in his words, not kind of surmising, this is what he said, that once the connection to artificial intelligence is made to the human brain, artificial intelligence will do more and more of human thinking until human thinking as we now know it is negligible. In other words, we will become AI. instead of manipulating information to manipulate our perceptions will come direct. And I've been writing in the books for a long time about the plan for a hive human mind, where you connect artificial intelligence to humans, and from a central point, you can then dictate the perceptions of the entire human race via the AI connection. And well, it's happening. And you know, if you look at this COVID jab, and now they're still trying to get it more into more and more people now with their manipulation and their lies. And they're now trying to move, or are moving more and more of the other vaccinations into the mRNA technique. And what is mRNA? It's messenger RNA, but it's synthetic mRNA. And what they're doing is manipulating the genetics of the body, which is what Aldous Huxley said in his book, Brave New World in 1932, that they were going to change the body from a procreating human in the way we procreate to a non-procreating human where the species would be produced technologically in what he called castes of different levels of intelligence. You've got a worker caste and then the elite caste and all that stuff. And the technology that Huxley talked about is now there. It's coming online. It's coming into the public arena. And so then you look at the blown up microscope images, electron microscope images of people's blood who've been fake vaccinated. And you see these self-replicating systems. They're technological self-replicating systems going on in the body. And it's technological. And my view has been for a considerable time now that what's happening is the body is being connected to the cloud and to artificial intelligence via these technological receiver transmission systems that are overriding what we would normally receive transmit on, which is DNA. And so, you know, when people talked about people being microchipped, you had these rice-size chips, and people were focusing on that, understandably, because that's what was available at the time. But that's not the way that it's being done. It's being done through nanotechnology. Nanotechnology, self-replicating, that can be put into the body with an injection. And so the idea is that you move from human 1.0, which is the biological human, not to know about that as well, to a much more synthetic human 2.0, and that human 2.0 will not be able to procreate. So a few things come from this. Number one, why are sperm counts plummeting all over the world? And testosterone levels too. Because they're phasing out human 1.0. That's what they're doing. And they're targeting men, first of all, targeting men. And when they started that, toxic masculinity and all that stuff, I said, they'll come for the women next. And they have, and increasingly so. Why? Because men and women are superfluous to human 2.0. And what's happening, and this is where the whole transgender thing comes in. When something comes out of nowhere, it is suddenly everywhere. It's the agenda. Someone's pressed a button on another stage. And so the idea is to create this non-procreating, not transgender human 2.0, no gender human 2.0. And if you're going to move society towards that, then you have to do it psychologically first before you can actually play it out, quote, physically. And so this is why they're targeting the kids as they are all over the world increasingly to confuse their sense of gender. This is why the BBC are telling us there's at least 100 different genders. Nonsense. And if you're going to confuse gender in young kids and young people, particularly young kids, what better way of doing it than to introduce them to men wearing dresses with beards that will completely confuse their sense of gender. And that's why you're having the drag queen phenomenon all over the Western world and further afield. It's to confuse the sense of gender. And, you know, I saw a poll, a study in America, where they were looking at the increase in children and young people who were identifying with a different gender than the one they were born with. And the numbers were higher everywhere than they used to be, much higher. So that's the propaganda. But the point is, they were significantly higher in Democrat-run states than they were in Republican-run states. So obviously, you don't reassess your agenda on whether the Republicans or the Democrats are in government in your state. What it indicates, obviously, is the scale of propaganda, far, far more in Democrat states, of the whole transgender agenda is impacting upon the number of people who are questioning their gender. And it's not happening naturally. It's not a natural phenomenon. It's a made to happen phenomenon. And that's all part of this complete rearrangement of the sense of gender among particularly young people, because they're going to be the adults when they want to bring in this full blown. And that's why it's happening. It's not happening by accident. It's happening because it's part of the perceptual programming sequence leading to the no gender human. And the no gender human, as Huxley pointed out, would not have parents. The parents would be the state. It's the end of parenthood, because without procreation, there's no parents. And look at what's happening. Again, just connect the dots. More and more control of children and what happens to them is being taken from parents and given to the state and state authorities and schools. Exactly as I was pointing out, the plan was decades ago in the books. And it's happening because they're moving step by step, what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, from how things have been to how things are planned to be. And that is that the state brings up children. So not only are they procreated artificially, they will then, throughout all their formative years, be under the complete control of the state, and also AI will be telling them what to think anyway. This is the world that we're moving into. And again, this is why the mainstream alternative media needs to open its mind and start to go into these areas and not just focus on who's going to be the next president.
Yeah, I have to confess, I've worked in Boston television news for the last 30 years. And I got to tell you, it's a lonely place. And that's why I've gravitated to people like you to understand what is really going on. And I really appreciate your time today. I know we're limited on time, and I know you're busy. So if you'd like to wrap it up, maybe you could just give us put you on the spot and just ask you, what do you think is coming in 2024, and what should we do to keep ourselves informed and on our toes?
Well, just very quickly, I have a Boston story, actually. When I was researching 9/11, I had a speaking event in Boston, and obviously Boston Airport was a big focus of 9/11, to say the least. And actually, while I was there, you'll see on the internet, by the way, claims that I'm a Freemason and I'm a shill and all that stuff. Because you give your life for 34 years to this, you take all the shite that comes with it, and people who've been looking at this for 5 minutes or even less suddenly start to decide you're a shill. But one of the things they say is there's a picture of him in a Freemasonic lodge in Boston, and yes, there is. And who put that out? I did. What happened? You know the big Boston Freemasonic Lodge.
Yeah, it's on Tremont Street.
Really big, yeah. And I was with a group of people, just 2 or 3, while I was speaking there, because I wanted to go and see this lodge because I heard it was big. So I was standing outside, and the door was open. So we walked in and looked around, and there's a big kind of entrance hall with some glass cabinets on the right hand side, as I remember. And there was nobody there. It was just no people there at all. So we kept walking. We came to some stairs, and we went up the stairs. Nobody. And then there was one guy, but apparently he was nothing to do with it. He was doing some building work or something. So we went past him and went into one of the temples, big bloody temple, still nobody there. And so what I did, the obvious thing, I sat in the worship master's chair, basically giving it this, and someone took a picture, and I used to use it in my talks for a couple of years after that. I always got a good laugh. And now it's on the internet, confirmation that I'm a Freemason. It's hilarious, really. But anyway, the Boston story is that I was reading everything I could about 9/11, and I saw how one reporter, is it the Boston Herald? Yeah, Boston Herald.
Mm-hmm.
And he was questioning some of the timeline of 9/11 and how it could happen, why planes took so long to get there and stuff. So I contacted him, and I met him near the airport, and I was talking to him about that, and it was kind of okay. But then I told him what I thought had happened, that I thought this was an inside job, and that it was made to happen because of what was going to play out for me, and what already was by then. And he said, "Oh no," he said, "No. The reason that boy George Bush wants to go into these Arab countries is to avenge the alleged plot to kill his father George Bush." And I kind of sat there, and this reporter had been going round with boy George Bush, place to place. And I sat there and I thought, how can you possibly think that all this, which by then was going on in reaction to 9/11, could be connected just to some failed plot, even if there was one, to assassinate his father? I mean, it's just extraordinary. But what I find, you would have found this as well, is when people don't want to go somewhere because the implications are too big, they'll convince themselves of anything, no matter how ludicrous, to explain events rather than actually facing why those events are really happening.
Sure.
So the mainstream media, yes, is controlled. I mean, I remember when I was a journalist, you can't write that, you can't write that. What? It just drive me crazy. But a lot of the media does actually believe some of just believe this nonsense. And I think part of that is, if I don't believe it, I haven't got a job, so I'll believe it. There are some who are doing it on purpose. Yeah, of course they are. But there's a lot of them are just they're just ignorant. They just don't know what's going on. They've never researched it. You know, investigative journalism to them is reading the morning papers and watching the 24-hour news on the newsroom television. And so we have an ignorant media as well as a compliant and controlled one. And that's why we need a vibrant, fearless, courageous, open-minded alternative media that will go not just where the mainstream won't, but massively further than the mainstream won't. Because without that, then we don't have a radar. We just have narratives that limit our perception of the true scale of what's going on.
Well, I'm doing my best to get the message out, and
good job.
Well, thanks. As soon as I let's see, I'm on page 500. I'm getting there. As soon as I finish this, I'll get the dream, and I hope we can talk again sometime. It's been a real privilege, and I want to thank you.
No, it's always great to get this information out. You know, it's all right, people like me researching it and all that stuff over a long period of time, but if you haven't got the platforms to communicate it, then you know, you might as well even not worth have it, because you can't tell anybody. So, you know, platforms like yours are vital, and the more of them we have, the better, especially in the light of current events where obviously they are seeking to suppress anything that's not the official agenda or the official narrative. And we're going into a very challenging time in relation to that.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Thank you so much, David Icke.
There's a lot of things that I've said over the years which were perceived to be crazy. And then suddenly they start to move mainstream.
I'm waiting for someone to convince me that we don't live in a simulation.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
What if all you ever knew was a lie?